Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee and do powerfully command thee, O Spirit. Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee and do powerfully command.
In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Hey, welcome everybody. This is the Abracast, and I am John Towers. We are continuing our, discussion, our look through of the book of Exodus, and we're just going to jump right into it. Don't have a lot of bullshit tonight, so here we go. Where did we leave off? We led off at the destruction, the division of the Red Sea and the destruction of the Egyptians, and this is kind of like previously on the Abracast. Exodus 14:26. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and their horsemen." And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing towards it. And the Lord swept them into the sea, and the water flowed back and covered the chariots and the horsemen and the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea, and not one of them survived. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared. And the Lord had put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. So we'll go to Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews. This portion entitled "The Song at the Sea." Mighty as faith, for the Spirit of God came down to the Israelites as a reward for their trust in God and in his servant Moses. And it was in this exaltation that they sang to the Lord a song that moved him to grant forgiveness for all of their sins. The song was the second of the 9 songs in the course of history of Israel sang to their God. They assembled to sing in the first in Egypt on the night when they were freed from captivity. The second was the song of triumph by the Red Sea. Their third was when a well sprang up in the wilderness, and Moses sang the fourth before his death. And the fifth was Joshua's song after his victory over the 5 Amorite kings. Deborah and Barak sang the sixth when they conquered Sisera. And the seventh was David's psalm of thanksgiving to God for his deliverance out of the land of all of his enemies. And the eighth was Solomon's song, at the dedication of the temple. 9 was Jehoshaphat's song, as trusting in God, he went into battle against the Moabites and the Ammonites. And the 10th and last song, however, will be that grand and mighty song when Israel will raise their voice in triumph at their future deliverance, for that they will be that will be the final release of Israel for all time. When Israel prepared to sound their praise to God for delivering them from destruction in the Red Sea, God, to show his recognition of Israel's fulfillment of the token of Abrahamic covenant, bade the angels who came to intone their song. And he said, "Wait, bitches, let my children sing first," he said. The incident with the angels is like the story of the king upon return from their victorious campaign. He was told that his son and his servant were waiting with wreaths in their hands, and were asking who should first crown him. And the king said, "Oh, ye fools, to question, and my servant should walk before my son. No, let my son come first." That was the second time the angels obliged to retire before Israel, when Israel stood by the Red Sea, before them the rolling waters, and behind them the host of Egypt. Then, too, the angels appeared to sing daily songs of praise to the Lord. But God called them, "Forbear, my children, they are in distress." And you would sing. But even after the men had completed their song, it was not yet given to the angels to raise their voices. For after the men followed the women of Israel, and only then came the turn of the angels, and they began to murmur, and they said, "Is it not enough that the men have preceded us? Shall the women come before us also?" But God replied, and he said, "As surely as ye live, so it is." At first, Israel requested their leader, Moses, to begin the song, but he declined, saying, "No, ye shall begin it, for it is a greater mark of honor to be praised by the multitude than by a single one." At once the people sang, "We will glorify the Eternal, for he has shown us a sign and tokens." And when the Egyptians passed the decree against us, he said, "Every son that is born ye shall cast into the river." Our mothers went into the fields, and thou didst bid a sleep to fall upon them. And they bore us without any pain. And the angels descended from heaven, and washed and anointed us, and robed us in many color silken garments, and placed in our hands 2 lumps, one of butter and one of honey. And when our mothers awoke and saw us washed and anointed and clothed in silk, then they praised thee and said, "Praise be God, who has not turned his grace and his lasting love from the seed of our father Abraham. And now, behold, they are in thy hand, and do with them what thou wilt." And they departed when the Egyptians saw us, and they approached to kill us. But thou, in thy great mercy, didst bid the earth to swallow us, and set us in another place, where we were not seen by Egyptians. And lo, in this way didst thou save us from their hand. And we grew up and we wandered in troops in Egypt, and were recognized, his parents and his family. All this hast thou done for us, and therefore we sing to thee. Thereupon Moses said, "We have given thanks to the Holy One. Blessed be and not I will raise his name, for to me it also has he shown signs and tokens. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he will become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The song by the Red Sea was much the song of Moses as of all Israel, for the great leader counted, and not less than all the other Israelites together, and besides, he had composed a large portion of the song in virtue of the Spirit of God that possessed them while they sang. Moses and the people mutually supplemented each other, so that as soon as Moses spoke half the verse, the people repeated it and likened the second complementary part to it. So Moses began with the half of the verse, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. Whereupon the people answered, the horse and the rider hath he thrown into the sea. And in this wise developed the whole song. But not alone the adults took part in the song. Even the sucklings dropped their mother's breasts to join in the singing. Yea, even the embryos of the womb joined in the melody. And the angels' voices swelled to the song. God so distinguished Israel during the passage through the Red Sea that even the children beheld his glory. Yea, even the women slaves saw more of the presence of God by the Red Sea than the prophet Ezekiel has ever permitted to behold. They closed the song with the words, let us set the crown of glory upon the head of the deliverer who suffers all things to perish, but does not himself decay, who changes all things, but is himself unchanged. His is the diadem of sovereignty, for he is the King of kings in this world, and his is the sovereignty of the world to come. It is his and will be his in all eternity. Thereupon Moses spake to Israel, and he said, ye have seen all the signs and all the miracles and the works of glory that the Holy One, blessed be he, hath wrought for you. But even more will he do for you in the world to come. For not like unto this world is the world of the hereafter. For this world, war and suffering and evil inclinations and Satan and the angel of death hold sway. But the future world, there will be neither suffering nor enmity, neither Satan nor the angel of death, neither groans nor oppression nor evil inclination. As Moses and the race that wandered from Egypt with him sang a song to the Lord by the Red Sea, so shall they sing again in the world to come. In the world to come, all generations will pass before the Lord, and they'll ask him who should first intone the song of praise, whereupon he will reply, it is the past, it was the generation of Moses that offered unto me the song of praise. Let them do it now once more. And Moses conducted the song by the Red Sea, so shall he do in the world hereafter. In other respects, too, it shall be in the world to come, as it was at the time of the song by the sea. For when Israel intoned the song of praise, God put on a festive robe, on which were embroidered all the promises for a happy future to Israel. Among them were written, Then shall thy light break forth as the morning. And then said among the heathen, the Lord hath done great things for them. Many similar promises, but when Israel sinned, God rent the festive robe, and he will not restore it. but put it on until the coming of the future world. After the men had completed the song, the women, under the guidance of Miriam, sang the same song accompanied of music and dancing. The Israelites had perfect faith that God would perform for them miracles and deeds of glory. Hence, they had provided themselves with timbrels and with the flutes, and that many have them at hand to glorify the anticipated miracles. Then Miriam said to the women, "Let us sing unto the Lord, for strength and sublimity are his. He lords it over the lordly, and he resents presumption. And he hurled Pharaoh's horses and chariots into the sea and drowned them, because wicked Pharaoh and his presumption pursued God's people of Israel." So the next thing that had these poor bastards wander out into the desert. Remember, with the legends of the Jews, one of the reasons it's so fascinating to me is because of all the stuff that they include to make up for the unanswered weird stuff in the Bible. So you're like, the one thing that I'm thinking of is like, well, they have this big, huge, like ham-fisted explanation about why God took them, the back way to Canaan, to the promised land, instead of just walking like straight there. So this is interesting. I suspect we're going to see a little bit more of that sort of behavior, or more of that sort of narrative being interjected here as we talk about the awful desert. Just as Israel had displayed sullenness and lack of faith upon approaching the sea, so did they upon leaving it. Hardly had they seen that the Egyptians met death in the waters of the sea when they spoke to Moses, and they said, "God has led us from Egypt only to grant us 5 tokens. To give us the wealth of Egypt, to let us walk in the clouds of glory, to cleave the sea for us, and to take vengeance upon the Egyptians, and to let us sing him a song of praise. Now that all this has taken place, let us return to Egypt." This is another one of these interesting things. It seems like one of the major themes of this part of the story, this oral tradition of the Jewish people that Ginsburg wrote down in these volumes, especially with this specific story. And I think it was even last episode when they were talking about how the one thing that God feared most was that the Egyptians would be like, it wasn't that bad. Being slaves and building the pyramids and all this stuff, like it wasn't that bad. At least we knew what was going on. And I think that this is a poignant sort of message for our time. Is like, we look around and we have a level of comfortability with the system. Even though something seems like it might be wrong, instead of doing the difficult thing and standing up for something that might be wrong. We're just like, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. Let's go along to get along. And that was one of the big fears that God had. As a matter of fact, I believe the passage was something like, he wasn't concerned about Pharaoh. He wasn't concerned about the army. He wasn't concerned about splitting the Red Sea. What he was concerned with was the faith of the Jews shaking and deciding to turn back. And this is what we see here. Now that we've done the 5 sort of token events of the Exodus up until this point, they at least some of the Israelites who were on the run with facing the grim outlook of marching into the deserts. Like, look, we did all these things. Can't we just return to Egypt now? It's like after all these things, they're still like, but we might be more comfortable there, than wandering around the fucking desert for 40 years. Anyhow, Moses answered him. The Eternal said, the Egyptians whom you've seen today, yes, shall see them again no more forever. But the people were not content, and they said, now that the Egyptians are dead, and therefore we can return to Egypt. And Moses said, you must now redeem your pledge. For God said, when thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. Still the people remained headstrong, and without giving heed to Moses, they set out on the road to Egypt, and under the guidance of an idol that they had brought with them out of Egypt. They had even retained during their passage through the sea. Only through sheer force was Moses able to restrain them from their sinful transgression. This was the second of the 10 temptations with which Israel tempted God during their wanderings through the desert. There was one more difficulty with the people that Moses had to overcome. The sea cast up many jewels and pearls and other treasures that had belonged to the Egyptians, drowned in the waves, and Israel found it hard to tear themselves away from that spot that brought them such riches. Moses, however, said, do you really believe that the sea will continue to yield pearls and jewels? From the sea they passed the desert Shur, a horrible and dreadful wilderness full of snakes, lizards, scorpions extending over hundreds of miles. So deadly is the nature of the snakes that dwelt in the desert that if one of them merely glides over the shadow of a flying bird, the bird falls into pieces. That was in this desert that the following happened to King Shapur. A cohort that he sent through the desert was swallowed by a snake, and the same fate overtook a second and third cohort. Upon the advice of his sages, he then filled the hides of animals with hot coals wrapped in straw, and he had these cast before the snakes until it expired. It was then a proof of Israel's great faith that in their God, they obeyed Moses, and without murmur or delay followed him into the frightful wilderness. Therefore God rewarded them for their trust in him. For not only were they not harmed by the snakes and the scorpions during their many years' stay in the desert, but they were even relieved of the fear of the reptiles. For as soon as the snakes saw the Israelites, they meekly lay down upon the sand. For 3 days they marched through the desert, uncomplaining. But when their supply of water gave out, the people murmured against Moses, and they're saying, what shall we drink? What shall we drink? What shall we drink? While crossing through the Red Sea, they had provided themselves with water, for miraculously the sea flowed sweet for them. But now that the supply was becoming exhausted, they began to give expression to their dissatisfaction. On this occasion, they again betrayed their faint-heartedness, for instead of seeking advice from their leader Moses, they began to murmur against him and against God, and even though at present they had not yet suffered from the lack of water, so poorly did they stand the test to which God had put them. For in fact, the very ground upon which they had trod, the running water beneath it, but they were not aware of this. God had desired to see how they would act under these conditions. The people were all the more exasperated because their joy when they sighted the springs and hastened to draw from the turned to neediest disappointment when they tasted the water and found it bitter. These deluded hopes cast them down spiritually as well as physically, and grieved them, not so much for their own sakes, but for the sakes of their young children, whose pleas for water they could not listen without tears. Some of the thoughtless and fickle of faith among them uttered the accusation that even the former kindness had been granted them, so much as the benefit, but rather with a view to the present and a much greater privation. These said that the death by the hand of the enemy is to be thrice preferred than to perishing by thirst. For when the wise man, speedy and painless departure from life is no way to be distinguished from immortality. The only real death, however, is slow and painfully dying. For the dread lies not in being dead, but in dying. While they indulged in these lamentations, Moses prayed to God to forgive the faint of heart for their unseemly words, and furthermore to supply the general want. Mindful of the distress of the people, Moses did not pray long, but uttered his request in a few words. And quickly as he had prayed, his prayer was answered, and God bade him to take a piece of a laurel tree and write upon it the great and glorious name of God, and throw it into the water, whereupon the water would become drinkable and sweet. So look at this magic shit that's going on right here. Just draw Adonai Tetragrammaton on a stick and throw it in the water. Make sure these motherfuckers see you do that too. The ways of the Holy One, blessed be he, differ from the ways of man. See, man turns bitter to sweet by agency of some sweet stuff. But God transforms the bitter water through a bitter laurel tree. And when Israel beheld this miracle, they asked for forgiveness for their heavenly Father, and they said, O Lord of the world, we sinned against thee when we murmured about the water. Not through this miracle alone, however, has Moriah become a significant spot for Israel, but especially because there God gave to Israel important precepts like Sabbath, rest, marriage, and civil law. And he said to the people, and if you observe these statutes, you will receive many more, the 10 Commandments, the Halakot, the Haggadot, the Torah, however, will bring you happiness in life. And if you will diligently endeavor to walk through life uprightly, so that you will be virtuous in your dealings with men, I will value it as if you had fulfilled all of the commandments. But they will put upon you none of those diseases that I brought Egypt. If, however, you will not be mindful of my laws, and will be visited with diseases, then I will be your physician, and I will make you well. For as soon as you observe those laws, shall the diseases vanish. The cause for the want of water at Moriah had been that for 3 days the people had neglected the study of Torah. And it was for this reason that the prophets and the elders of Israel instituted the custom of reading from the Torah on Saturdays, Mondays, and Thursdays at the public service, so that 3 days might never again pass without reading from the Torah. From Mara, they moved to Elim. From a distance, palm trees made the place look inviting enough. But when the people came close, they were again disappointed. There were not more than 70 palm trees. There were of stunted growth owing to lack of water. In spite of the presence of the 12 wells of water, the soil was so barren and sandy that the wells were not sufficient to water it. Here again, the marvelous intercession of God in favor of the fate of Israel is shown. For the scant supply of water at Elim which had hardly sufficed for 70 palm trees, satisfied 60 myriads of the wandering people that stayed there for several days. The men of understanding could, at this place, see clear allusion for the fortune of the people. For there are 12 tribes of the people, each of which, if it prove God-fearing, will be a well of water, inasmuch as piety will constantly and continually bring forth beautiful deeds. The leaders of the people, however, are 70, and they recall the noble palm tree for an outward appearance as well as for its fruits. It is the most beautiful of trees, whose seat of life does not lie buried deep in its roots, as with other plants, but soars high, set like the heart in the midst of the branches, by which it is surrounded as a queen under protection of her bodyguard. The soul of him who has tasted piety possesses a similar spirit. It has learned to look up and ascend itself, ever busy with spiritual things and investigation of divine beauty, disdains earthly things and considers them only a childish play, whereas the aspirations alone seem serious. It was at Elim where, at the creation of the world, God had made the 12 wells of water and the 70 palm trees to correspond with the 12 tribes and the 70 elders of Israel. And Israel first took up the study of law, for they studied the laws given to them at Moriah. So, I understand that the legend of the Jews is not, a religious text. It's not like reading the Bible or reading the Torah or whatever. But things like this always make me take note. And things like this bit here, where they're saying that in the beginning, when God was creating the firmament and the plants and all this stuff, he was like, oh shit, a couple generations, I'm going to need 12 wells here, and we need 70 palm trees here. So he just builds it, and it just sits there and waits until he needs it. So he's seeing God as like a God of the sky, the creation God, God of the mountain, which we'll see more as we get through, especially when we get to Sinai and all this other kind of stuff. But one of the interesting things that we see here is him being the God of time. It's like, it sort of reminds me of like the first Bill and Ted movie, where they're like, they go back and they leave all the Post-it notes and stuff for themselves. I have to remember to leave this key here next time. It's interesting and it's fun, right? All right, so they got away from Egypt. They got away from the Egyptian army, and they walked through the Red Sea. They were concerned about heading into the desert. They got thirsty. God provided them water. So what's next? It's food. So this portion of the story is called the heavenly food. The bread which Israel had taken along out of Egypt sufficed for 31 days, and when they had consumed it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against their leader Moses. It was not only immediate want that oppressed them, but despair of a food supply for the future. For when they saw the vast, extensive, utterly barren wilderness before them, their courage gave way, and they said, "We migrated expecting freedom, but now we are not even free from the cares of subsistence. We are not, as our leader promised, the happiest, but in truth the most unfortunate of men. After our leader's words had keyed us to the highest pitch of expectations and had filled our ears with vain hopes. He tortures us with famine and does not provide even the necessary food. With the name of the new settlement, he has deceived his great multitude. After he succeeded in leading us from a well-known to an uninhabited land, he now plans to send us into the underworld, the last road of life. Would to God he had died by the hands of the Lord during the 3 days of darkness in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and when we did eat bread to the full. In their exasperation, they spoke untruths, for in reality they had suffered from the want of food in Egypt too, as the Egyptians had not given them enough to eat. In spite of the railings against him, Moses was not so much indignant about their words as about the fickleness of the people. After those many quite extraordinary experiences, they had no right to expect merely the natural and the probable, but should cheerfully have trusted him. For truly, in the sight of all, they had been shown the most tangible proofs of his reliability. When, on the other hand, Moses considered their distress, he forgave them. For he told himself that as a multitude is by nature fickle and allows itself to be easily influenced by the impressions of the moment, which casts the past into oblivion and engender the despair of the future. This is actually why we have two houses of Congress, by the way. We have the Senate and the House. That's why their election cycles run differently. It's exactly because of this observation Moses has right here. God as forgave the unworthy conduct of Israel, and instead of being angry with them because they murmured against him when it should have been their duty to pray to him, he was all ready to grant them aid, saying to Moses, "They act according to their lights, and I will act according to mine, and not later than tomorrow morning manna will descend from heaven." And Moses was probably like, "What the fuck is manna? What's that?" As a reward for Abraham's readiness in answer to the summons to sacrifice Isaac, when he said, "Here I am," God promised manna to the descendants of Abraham with the same words, "Here I am." In the same way, during their wanderings through the wilderness, God repaid the descendants of Abraham for what their ancestor had done by the angels who visited him. He himself had fetched bread for them, and likewise God himself caused bread to rain from heaven. He himself ran before them on their way, and likewise God moved before Israel. He had water fetched for them, and likewise God, through Moses, caused water to flow from the rock. He bade them shade under the tree, and likewise God had a cloud spread over Israel. Then God spoke to Moses. God spoke to Moses. "I will immediately reveal myself without Jacob, and I will rain bread from my treasure in heaven for you. And the people shall go out and gather it at a certain rate every day." There were good reasons for not exceeding a day's rations, the daily downpour of manna. First, they might be spared the need of carrying it on their wanderings. Secondly, they might daily receive it hot. And lastly, that they might day by day depend upon God's aid. In this way, exercise themselves in faith. So this is interesting, because he just flat out says it. It's a training tool. Every day, I'll give you. It's like I got these 2 new parakeets, and every day I got cats. Everyone knows I got cats. So I got cats, and I got to feed them every day. And that's what God's like. Hey, don't bother picking up more than you can eat during a day, because I'm going to feed you in the morning. I'm going to feed you tomorrow morning, unless it's Saturday and Sunday. I sleep in a little bit. You know what I'm saying? And I'll feed you when I can, bitches. But the other funny thing is, it's like Krispy Kreme. like the lights come on, the red light comes on the outside of the building when the donuts are hot. While the people were still abed, God fulfilled their desire and rained down manna for them. For this food had been created on the second day of creation and ground by the angels. And it later descended for the wanderers in the wilderness. The mills are stationed in the third heaven, where manna is constantly being ground for future use of the pious. For the future world, manna will be set before them. Manna deserves its name, quote, bread of the angels, unquote, but only because it is prepared by them, but because those who partake of it become equal to angels in strength, and furthermore, like them, have no need for easing themselves, as manna is entirely dissolved into the body. Not until they sinned did they have to ease themselves like ordinary mortal. Shitting. They're talking about shitting, everybody. They're talking about they didn't have to shit while they were wandering around in the desert for 40 years. Manna also showed its heavenly origin in the miraculous flavor it possessed. There was no need of cooking or baking. It did not require any preparation, and still it contained the flavor of every conceivable dish. One had only to desire a certain dish, and no sooner had he thought of it than manna had the flavor of the dish desired. The same food had a different taste, and to everyone who partook of it, according to his age, the little children's tasted like milk or chicken nuggets, or macaroni and cheese, and the strong youths like bread, and the old men like sloppy joes or honey. Maybe a Jack and Coke or two. The sick like barley steeped in the oil and the honey. As miraculous as the taste of manna was, its descent from heaven, first came a north wind to sweep the floor of the desert, then a rain to wash it quite clean. The dew descended upon it, which was congealed into a solid substance by the wind, and it might serve as a table for the heaven descending gold. But that no insects or vermin might settle upon the manna, the frozen dew formed not only a tablecloth, but also a cover for the manna, so that it lay enclosed there as in a casket, protected from soiling or pollution above and below. It's like Tupperware. God send him some Tupperware. So how do they gather the manna? With an easy mind. Every individual might perform his morning prayer in his house and recite the Shema, then betake himself to the entrance of his tent and gather manna for himself and for his family. The gathering of manna caused little trouble, and those among the people who were too lazy to perform even the slightest work went out while the manna fell, so that it fell straight into their hands. The manna lasted until the 4th hour of the day, when it melted. But even the melted manna was not wasted, for out of it formed the rivers from which the pious will drink in the hereafter. The heathen even attempted to drink out of these streams, but the manna tasted so deliciously to the Jews, had a quite bitter taste in the mouth of the heathen. Only indirectly could they partake of the enjoyment of this manna. They used to catch the animals that drank the melted manna, and even in this form, it was so delicious that the heathen cried, "Happy is the people that is in such a case." For the descent of the manna was not a secret to the heathen, as it settled in such an enormous heights that the kings of the east and of the west could see how Israel received this miraculous food. These manna are going like hotcakes. The mass of the manna was in proportion to its height, for as much descended day by day. It might have satisfied the wants of 60 myriads of people through 2,000 years. Such profusion of manna fell over the body of Joshua alone, as might have sufficed for the maintenance of the whole congregation. Manna indeed had the peculiarity of falling to every individual in the same measure, and when, after gathering, they measured it, and they found that there was an omer for every man. Many lawsuits were amicably decided through the fall of manna. If a married couple came before Moses, each accusing the other of inconstancy, Moses would say to them, "Tomorrow morning judgment will be given." And if then manna descended for the wife before the house of her husband, it was known that he was in the right. But if her share descended before the house of her own parents, she was in the right. This is just lazy judiciary right here. It depends on how many flapjacks someone throws in your yard. What? The only days in which manna did not descend were the Sabbath and the holy days. But then a double portion fell on the preceding day. These days had the further distinction that while they lasted, the color of the manna sparkled more than usual, and it tasted better than usual. The people, however, were faint-hearted, and on the very first Sabbath, they wanted to go out as usual to gather the manna in the morning. Although the announcement had been made that God would not send food on that day, Moses, however, restrained them. They attempted to do it again towards the evening, and Moses restrained them with the words, "Today ye shall not find it in the field." These words, they were greatly alarmed, for they feared that they might not receive it any more at all. But their leader quieted them with the words, "Today ye shall not find any of it, but assuredly tomorrow." Assuredly tomorrow. In this world ye shall not receive manna on the Sabbath, but assuredly in the future world. Future world. When I was growing up, we had these things called arcades, video game arcades. So instead of everyone having like this PlayStations or whatever, you actually had to go somewhere to put a quarter in a machine to play a video game. Okay, boomer. But the video game arcade in one of the little towns that I lived in growing up was called Future World. Let's go to Future World. I remember walking in. It's all dark and it's like fucking people walking around with pockets full of quarters. It smelled like hot dogs in there, I think. I used to play Tempest. Anyhow, the unbelieving among them did not hearken into the words of God, and went out into the Sabbath to find a manna. And hereupon God said to Moses, "Announce these words to Israel: I have led you out of Egypt. I cleft the sea for you. I sent you manna, and I caused a well of water to spring up for you. I have sent these quails to come to you and battled for you against Amalek, who wrought other miracles for you, and you still do not obey my statutes and commandments. You have not even the excuse that I impose full many commandments upon you, for that all that I bade you to do at Moriah was to observe the Sabbath, and you have violated it. If," continues Moses, "you will observe the Sabbath, God will give you 3 festivals in the month of Nisan, Siwan, and Tishri. And as the reward for these observances of the Sabbath, you will receive 6 gifts from God: the land of Israel, the future world arcade, the new world, the sovereignty of the dynasty of David, the institution of the priests and the Levites. And furthermore, as a reward for the observation of Sabbath, you shall be freed from the 3 great afflictions, from suffering, from the times of Gog and Magog, and the travails in the Messianic times, and from the day of great judgment. And You haven't had to poop. Like, I'm not even making you poop. You don't have to. You don't even have to find a place to shit in the desert. I'm taking care of all that stuff with all this angel bread food that I'm giving you. Ungrateful motherfuckers. When Israel heard these exhortations and promises, they determined to observe the Sabbath, and they did so. They did not know, to be sure, that they had lost through their violation of the first Sabbath. Had Israel then observed Sabbath, no nation would ever have been able to exercise any authority over them. Dun, dun, dun. Spoiler alert. This, moreover, was not the only sin that Israel committed during this time, for some among them also broke the other commandment in regarding to manna. That is, do not store it away from day to day. These sinners were none other than the infamous pair, Dathan and Abiram, who did not hearken to the word of God, but saved the manna for the following day. But they fancied they could conceal their sinful deed. They were mistaken for great swarms of worms bred from the manna. These moved in a long train from their tents into the other tents, so that everyone perceived what these two had done. So would they be like super strong angelic worms? To serve future generations as tangible proof of the infinite power of God, the Lord bade Moses to lay an earthen vessel of manna before the holy ark. And with this command, he was carried out by Aaron in the second year of the wanderings through the desert. When many centuries later, the prophet Jeremiah exhorted his contemporaries to the study of Torah, they answered his exhortation, saying, how shall we maintain ourselves? The prophet brought forth the vessel with manna and spoke to them, saying, O generation, see ye the word of the Lord. See what it is that served your fathers as food when they applied themselves to the study of Torah. You too will God support in the same way if you will but devote yourself to the study of the Torah. When the imminent destruction of the temple was announced to King Josiah, he concealed the holy ark, and with it also the vessels of manna, as well as the jug filled with the sacred oil, which was used by Moses for anointing the sacred implements and other sacred objects. And the Messianic times and the prophet of Elijah will restore these concealed objects. Israel received 3 gifts during their wanderings through the desert as well. The cloud of glory, the manna for the first merits of Miriam, the second of those of Aaron, and the third of those for Moses. When Miriam died, the well disappeared for a time, but it reappeared as a reward for the merits of Aaron and Moses. And when Aaron died, the clouds of glory disappeared for a time, but reappeared, owning to the merits of Moses. And when the last name died, the well, the clouds of glory, and the manna disappeared forever. Throughout 40 years, however, manna served them not only as food, but also as provender for their cattle. For the dew that preceded the fall of the manna during the night brought grain for their cattle. Manna also replaced perfume for them. You smell just like a sloppy Joe, baby. Give it to me. And it shed their excellent fragrance upon those who ate it. In spite of all the excellent qualities of manna, they were not satisfied with it and demanded that Moses and Aaron give them flesh to eat. They replied, we might put up with you if if you murmured only against us, but you murmur against the Eternal. Come forward that you might hear the judgment of God. And once God appeared to Moses, and he said to him, it is revealed to me that your congregation of Israel have said that what they want to say, and tell them this. You have demanded 2 things. You have desired bread, and I gave it to you because man cannot exist without it. But now, filled to satiety, you demand flesh. This also I will give you. so that you might not say that if your wish was denied, God cannot grant it. But for some future time you shall make atonement for it. I am judge and shall assign punishment for this. My thing is, if the manna tastes like whatever you want it to taste like, why would you care? It's like that scene from The Matrix where Cypher's like, I know this isn't steak, but it tastes like steak though. In the meantime, however, God granted their wish, and towards the evening thick swarms of quail. This is the quail business that they talked about before. Once again, proving that God is the God of time. Quails came up from the sea, covered with whole camp, taking flight quite low, not 2 ells above the ground, so that they might be caught easily. Contrary to the manna, which fell in the morning, the quails did not come before evenfall. The radiant countenance of God gave them their former, as their desire for bread was justified with a darkened mien. Under cover of night he sent quails. Not because one food came in the morning and the second in the evening. Moses instituted the custom among his people of taking 2 meals a day, one in the morning and one in the evening. So he set the meal with the use of meat in the evening. At the same time, he taught them prayer in which they were to offer thanks for eating manna, which read, Blessed be thou, O God, our Lord, King of the world, who in thy bounty dost provide for all the world, whom in thy grace, goodwill, and mercy doth grant food for every creature, for grace and the everlasting. Thanks to the bounty, we have never lacked for food, nor ever shall lack it for great name's sake. For thou suppliest, providest for all. Thou art bountiful and nourishest all thy creatures which thou hast made. Blessed be thou, O God, dost provide for all. Maybe they're waffles. Manna. It's definitely the invention of breakfast, right? I think that's what we just heard. Alright, guys. I'm John. This has been the Abracast. Hold on, I gotta sign off on my papers here. Anyhow, I'll let Hilla tell you the rest of it. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts. You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books. Take control of your destiny. Understand your past. Put your present in context and know your future with a twist. Check out the Abracast Tarot card deck. Your body is your temple. So let's make sure you got a badass t-shirt on it. Variety of cool occult themed t-shirts. And other merch like stickers, wall art, mugs, and more. Welcome to the Red Archive. Get access to over 50 hours of archived episodes. More bonus audio. Additional exclusive content. All this for only $1 a month. Are you interested in the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence? Learn more at Abracast.com.